How far out are you?
But they said the Navy, that will probably all have enough to eat, right?
We will have enough to eat, absolutely.
We'll have enough to eat.
Well, I'll tell them he can bring some fresh friends too. So if you would join me, and those who can, rise for the salute our flag. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Martin Luther said, "The fewer the words, the better the prayer." We invoke thy blessing, O Lord, on this day and on this place for what we are about to face. And lest we seem to plead again, we humbly now all say, Amen. Okay, that's it. Eat. Food's in here. Everything you need's in here. Drinks, roast beef, chicken, all that stuff. If we run out of chicken, there's another plate of chicken in the heater.
All right.
Trying to keep it hot. After we eat, we'll move on with our regular scheduled entertainment. So don't be shy. Load up, folks, because there's a lot of food and a lot of empty seats. So that means, as Georgia just said,
you know, drag races and all. I mean, she's going nuts. It was
I could have
absolutely
your
great.
attention, please. We're finished the eating part of the eating. Now we're going to have the program part of the program. We're going to start with the Colonel, who's going to give us his remarks on what's going on, and then we'll get to the main event, Mr. Ryan Szymanski from the battleship. And then a few words after that from Mr. Moran's, and then some words from me, and then adios muchachos and muchachos. So that's it. So Colonel Richter, it's all yours.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here, and thanks to all the people that had a hand in putting this together. I really appreciate it. Okay, well, the biggest thing I think that's going on right now, although they didn't really talk about it that much at the governor's military review last Sunday, is that the governor is planning to turn the Division of Veterans Services into a cabinet-level agency, which would mean essentially it's being separated out from the Department of Military and Veterans Affairs. Well, basically you're going to have the military in one place and the veterans in another. And that's because of all the difficulties we had during COVID in the veterans' homes. And they're really working hard. Now what they did talk about at the governor's review, before the governor's review, is that they are really putting a lot more emphasis on veteran services. Now, as of now, or just until recently, they had only 15 veteran services offices at the county level. They didn't have one for each county. In the future, they're going to have one for each county. They've just brought one online for Passaic County, and Camden County is next. And each veteran services office has a trained and accredited veteran services officer. There's also there's going to be better mental health training for anybody who works with service members or veterans. And they've got something like $75 million in awards for projects related to veterans in the past 12 months. They're going to have the largest capital improvement of veterans' homes in the entire United States. And basically what they're going to do, now, as of now, Vineland is set up so that each person has a private room. But in Menlo Park and Paramus, it's 2 people to a room. What they're going to do is they're going to modify Menlo Park and Paramus so that everybody there can also have their own room. I remember what it was like when I was a kid when I finally got my own room. That really means something to a person. It's an extension of your personality. So I think that the same event in my life that helped me put my personality together is gonna help some of these elderly vets to keep their personalities together. I like the idea a whole lot. On the military side, they're gonna have the largest ever deployment of New Jersey National Guard overseas this year. Well, I guess maybe combined overseas and domestic. So that's good news for us, because maybe there will be a need for a naval militia and a state guard more than there would be otherwise. As of right now, we have a lot of units deployed to places in the south, doing pre-mobilization training. We have the 42nd Infantry Brigade combat team is getting ready to go to Iraq and Syria. And some of our units are actually going to be going to the southern border. So that's a bit of a change. Now, the Army National Guard says recruitment and retention are not a problem. Recruitment, they said, is 114% of the goal, and retention is 138%. So if it weren't for all the deployments, maybe there would be less need for us. But it sort of evens out. The Air National Guard, again, they're 100% of their recruiting goal and 92% of retention, so they're doing pretty well also. They've got the 177th Fighter Wing in the Middle East with F-16s. And the 108th Wing, our tanker wing, has just converted to the KC-46A Pegasus.
Right.
Which is a brand new tanker to replace. They're actually replacing KC-135 Strato tankers that have been around since I was a teenager. And one thing they said, well, there's also the change in the way the National Guard cooperates with the active Air Force. They have something called active association, where National Guard individuals and aircraft will be added to active units rather than operating as independent units themselves. I'm not sure that everybody's happy with that, but that's something that's going on. Now, one thing interesting about the KC-46A, they say it refuels in a hostile environment. That's interesting, because usually tankers are considered to be the most vulnerable aircraft in the air. So I'm not sure what they've done to these KC-46As to make them able to refuel in a hostile environment. I gotta believe that they gotta do their refueling pretty quickly. I don't see anything that looks like defensive armament on any of them, but that doesn't mean it isn't there. I'm guessing that there's a whole lot of electronics that keeps those aircraft safe. And now there are something like 2,500 people in the Air National Guard, and about 40% of them were on active duty as of last Sunday. They're looking to retire the F-16 in 4 or 5 years. Evidently, the F-16s that we have are the oldest ones in the national inventory. And what they're hoping to get is the F-35, which would be used both for homeland defense and for worldwide missions. The Joint Staff, which we work for, is they're actually doing more with the state partnership program than they ever had before. Now, I think I gave you some handouts about the state partnership program. I gave you a fact sheet and a map. But one thing that was very obvious at the governor's military review, that we had about 10 people there from Albania, including a couple of generals. And we also had a senior officer from Cyprus, which is our new partner. So this program is really getting going. There was something said about Cyprus being part of one of the places where people evacuated from the Middle East are going to go.
Oh, I'm sorry.
They've also started a new directorate in the Joint Staff, a J9 officer who's gonna take over. It's an umbrella for basically programs that support military families and veterans. So mainly military families, and the headquarters where all that's taken place is in the Bordentown Armory. One place where they've got a little strength issue is with warrant officers. Warrant officers for the National Guard are something like 88% strength, and they need to recruit more of them. One thing I found out was that even though statutorily the maximum age for anybody in the organized militia is age 64, in fact, people are being retired earlier than that. For example, warrant officers have to retire at 62, and I'm guessing that everybody else has to retire at 60 because they're following actually the federal active duty guidelines. Okay, that does it pretty much for what the MAVA is doing, what the National Guard is doing, what Veteran Services is doing. And then I had a meeting with Colonel Morris, who is our military boss. He's the chief of the Joint Staff. Some of you have met him, some of you have seen him. I think he did visit us at Princeton once. I think that, he's asking a lot of questions about our boats, because I think that he is not seeing them as useful as we are. So right now, his two areas of questioning include, for one thing, inspectability. Who's going to inspect them? Basically, the National Guard does not have what it takes to inspect them. So I know I had a conversation on the phone with Mr. Floyd recently, and I have yet to write that up yet, but we're going to give some answers for that. And there are a number of answers. Mm-hmm. Another question he had about the boats was hazardous materials. Well, of course, I had not remembered, and he never knew that we actually did an operation on the boats along quite a while ago, where we removed all the hazardous materials from the tanks inside the boats. Mm-hmm. So that work has largely been done. Any hazardous materials we have would be things like paint and lubricants that we may keep on hand at Princeton, and those materials were inspected when we were still in Lodi, and there were no deficiencies found by the facilities management people. So I think we're eventually going to be able to write something that I hope will make Colonel Morris feel better about the boats. I think we're beginning to fight a little uphill there.
Would he be satisfied, sir, with the Coast Guard auxiliary inspection level?
Well, that's one of the alternatives we're going to offer. There are a number of alternatives, and we're going to try and put them all out there. Mm-hmm. So yes, I am going to work on a comprehensive reply to those issues. Now, one thing, of course, he mentioned. Now, that almost all of us here, almost all of us that belong to the Naval Militia Joint Command, are over age in terms of the statute. So I would have to say that our future may be in other directions, but there are some things we're going to work on, and this is something that our visitor may be interested in. I know we recently, through the kindness of Captain Sampson's daughters, acquired a sizable collection of Navy memorabilia, including artwork, because our Captain Sampson was a nationally recognized Navy artist. He has his work hanging at Anacostia. So he gave us some of his own work, he gave us some of other people's work, he gave us some very serious books. And so I guess one of the things I'm interested in hearing about from you is what plans you have for actually having museum displays and possibly a library aboard the New Jersey. Mm-hmm. So if you have plans for that, we're interested, I think, in helping, because our future may be a little dim. So, for the time being, we can keep all those materials at Princeton. But now, one thing that Colonel Morris said when I brought up that idea to him is that, well, we already have, we're authorized one location, evidently, for the Militia Museum, and we already have two. So, because I had thought that we would make a third one. But, you know, we can play games with designating it so that we can still keep it and we can actually let the public in when we're there. But that's for the time being. But I also think that, you know, if we can't manage to hold on to these items, that New Jersey might be a place where they could go. Now, I have not mentioned that yet to, well, actually, there's more stuff that is left over from Captain Sampson. It's some of the best stuff, and I know his daughters were trying to give it to the Newark Museum. I also made them aware of the State Museum at Trenton. But if New Jersey is actually going to have museum spaces and a library, I think that would be a good alternative. I think they would like it, and I need to put it up to them. Okay, that's everything I have. Does anyone have any questions for me? Okay, thanks very much for listening. And if there are still some handouts there that haven't found a home, please take them.
All right, Mr. Floyd, let's, where's your projector? Let's get set.
They're all, oh, there somewhere.
No, the Air Force just raised their recruiting ceiling to 42 for no enlisted. And I know, because all my kids are getting like, you know, you want to come play with the Air Force? No, we're good in the
There's a general problem.
suffer through this horrible week. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm going to tell you a little bit about our plans for dry docking the battleship, which hopefully is going to happen first quarter of 2024. More details on that in a minute. So first disclaimer here is this is what we know as of today. Tomorrow, all my answers to your questions will be completely different because I'll have gotten a new set of information, and the day after that it'll be even more different. So, going to go through some of the common questions I get asked about dry docking first, and then we'll go into some of the why are we doing it, what is our scope of work, that sort of information. First question people always ask is, when are we planning on doing it? We had hoped to go into dry dock in January or February of this upcoming year because those are our slowest months. We lose the least money by being closed on those months. There are 2 military Sea Lift Command ships ahead of us to get into the dry dock, however. So the earliest we can possibly get in is late February. The project will probably last about 2 months, so we would be in there for most of March and April. So that is the plan as of right now. Again, no dry docking ever happens on plan. So the ship ahead of us could be delayed weeks, and that's going to push us back. And then, who knows, we could be out of there late as well. The next question I get asked is, can I come to the yard and visit the ship? And this is one that we're not entirely sure yet. We have not signed a contract with the yard yet. On Wednesday, the museum's board of directors voted to sign the contract, but we haven't sat down with them to do it yet. Initial talks, they're going to let us do tours of the dry dock, which would be taking people into the dry dock under the ship. We are not expecting to dry dock the ship again for another 30 years. It's been over 30 years since the ship was last out of the water, so this is really a once-in-a-generation experience. That said, we don't have 100% certainty that we'll be able to do it or when we'll be able to do it. Next question I always get asked is, can I ride the ship? And the short answer to this is almost certainly no. Because there's so many stakeholders in this, I've got a slide that comes up later, but if insurance says no, if the Coast Guard says no, if the yard says no, then we can't do it, even if everybody else says yes. So right now, we're thinking we're not going to be able to have anyone ride the ship. There'll be a couple of workers on there as line handlers. There will be a harbor pilot on board and a tugboat captain, but that could be everyone that's on the ship.
Does the ship run?
No. Well, let me start with the basics. Okay. So, New Jersey is an Iowa-class battleship built between 1940 and 1943. She served on and off throughout World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Lebanese Civil War, and then all the way up until 1991. In 1991, the Navy decommissions her. The crew comes off, they seal up the engines, they demilitarize the guns, radars, all that gets taken out of service, and she's put into mothballs in case they ever need her again as an active warship. In 1999, the Navy decides to take the two most historically significant Iowas and turn them into museums and leave the other two in reserve. So they choose to turn Missouri and New Jersey into museum ships at that time, and Wisconsin and Iowa are kept in mothballs. In 2012, the Navy decides that they're not going to keep any of these in mothballs, and they turn Wisconsin and Iowa into museums. So we are the ship is not owned by the Navy anymore. There are no active or reservist or any other sort of Navy personnel on board. We are a nonprofit with staff like me, and that's it. So the ship does not operate in any way. We will require at least 4 tugboats to get to the yard. So long answer to a short question, which you'll find is common with me, unfortunately.
Where exactly is the yard we're talking about?
Oh, good question. I'm going to get to that in a minute.
Okay, sorry.
There's a history there. It's great. Another long answer to a short question. Can people get on the ship while we're in the yard? No, we're not going to have full power, alarm systems, that sort of stuff. So even if we are able to get people into the dry dock to walk under the ship and see her, we're not going to be doing tours like normal. Like I said earlier, we're only planning on being in the yard for about 60 days. So the ship will probably be closed 3 to 4 months total at the beginning of this upcoming year. But then we'll resume operations right in Camden where we've always been. All right, so there are, I believe it's now 46 former U.S. Navy warships that have been turned into museum ships that are administered by Naval Sea Systems Command, NAVSEA. And of those ships, I've got the 16 largest ones here on the screen. They require museum ships to dry dock every 20 years. That's what best practice is. So this list here is supposed to show you how effective we have been at doing this. So the battleship Texas last dry docked by the Navy in 1947. As a museum, she is not dry docked at all for over 40 years. She's dry docked in 1989, and now she's in the yard for what is going to be somewhere between a $60 and $100 million project to correct some of the deferred maintenance that she's received. That's what happens when your ship is not dry docked for a very long period of time. Other ships on this list, North Carolina, Alabama, they were intentionally put aground when they were towed to their home states so that hurricanes couldn't drag them out to sea. It also means that they cannot go into the yard for repair work. The aircraft carriers and the cruisers are in no better shape than the battleships. The short answer is Massachusetts, Texas, and Missouri are the only 3 museum battleships that have been dry docked in my lifetime. And hopefully New Jersey soon. She hasn't been out of the water since 1990 into early 1991. That was when the Navy was deactivating the ship and sealing everything up. So, this is a big deal. The Navy wants it done every 20 years. We're currently at 33 years. And why are we doing it? It's because Chapter 50 of the Navy Manual says that inactive ships are supposed to be dry docked every 20 years. That's what NAVSEA holds us to. The Secretary of the Interior has a manual for historic vessel preservation. Says the same exact thing. There's a British manual for their museum ships. Says the same thing. If you're on an active ship, you want to dry dock every 2 or 3 years. A museum ship, it's every 20 or so. So we've got these requirements. If we go now, it will only be 1/10 of the price of what Texas is paying. So the timing is very critical because the museum's annual budget is about $5 million. That's about half of the budget for the dry docking project. So it takes 2 years of operating expense to do the ship right now when we're not in critical condition. So we're looking at something like 20 times that if we have a major issue, and we're just not going to be able to do it if we wait that long. The other major thing that's causing us to do it now, the other year, the destroyer USS Sullivan sank at her mooring. She's a museum ship. She has hull thickness that's very similar to some of our shell plating at the bow. She was built in the exact same year as we were. And she was last dry docked around the same time as we were. So that got national attention that, hey, museum ships are sinking all over the place. Do you know the state of New Jersey has 3 museum warships? There is the Coast Guard cutter, the lightship Barnegat. She foundered about a decade ago. She sunk in Camden. There is the World War II era submarine USS Ling. She foundered about a half a decade ago. She sunk up in Hackensack. And there's the battleship. And if we don't do anything within 20 years, we'll be sitting on the bottom of the Delaware River too. So we were able to use the budget surplus that the state had at the end of the COVID pandemic and these examples of other museum ships that have sunk to go to the state and say, hey, we need $10 million to dry dock the ship. It's like, great, sounds like a good idea. Here's 5. I'll talk more about the money later. So the next question people always ask is, do you really have to dry dock the ship? What else can you do? Excuse me, let me do that. So there are a couple of alternatives here. We could just use the ship consumptively, which is we don't plan on dry docking her, we plan on operating her until she cannot operate anymore, and then we sell her for scrap metal. 45,000 tons of pre-nuclear steel. That should cover all of our debt by that point. So believe it or not, some museum ships are being operated like this. You could argue that other ships here in the state of New Jersey have been operated like this because they were operated to the point that they sank without any major plans for work like this. So we really don't think that's an option. The next option is a movable cofferdam, which is what you see here. That's the side of the cruiser Olympia. For the last 7 or 8 years, they have been using this movable cofferdam system. And what you see here is about a 4-foot long box that they can suction cup onto the hull of the ship, pump out the water that's in there, and that way do work on the hull that's normally underwater. They're doing that because their ship is in such bad condition they cannot tow her to dry dock without fear of her sinking. So they have to do that work to stabilize her before they can go into dry dock. That is not a replacement for dry dock, that is something that they need to do to get into dry dock. Olympia is currently the steel-hulled vessel which has been afloat the longest without going into dry dock. She was last out of the water in 1945.
Wow.
So they are looking at approximately $30 to $50 million of repair work once they've finished this. The problem is you're doing 4 feet at a time on a ship that's about 400 feet long, so you got 2 sides about 800 feet, or close to the length of an Iowa-class battleship. 4 feet at a time, it takes about 2 weeks to sandblast and paint each 4-foot section. So like I said, they're 7 or 8 years into this. They're not even halfway done yet. The other alternative, this is the battleship North Carolina. Remember, she was intentionally run aground so that she doesn't drift away. They built a permanent cofferdam around the ship, drain the water out, and they're able to do work on her below water section in that. They have to do this because she sprung a leak there at the bow, which is the weakest shell plating on American fast battleship. It's right there at the front. So they have to replace all of this steel, and you can't really tell from the picture, but they also have to replace all the framing on the inside there. So it costs them approximately $18 million to build the cofferdam around the ship, which is twice what we're going to spend to dry dock the ship. And that's just getting to the point where they can do the work. Now they have to spend another $5 or $10 million to do this replacement work. So again, that's a cool idea, but we couldn't do that. It's inflating our budget way too much. So we've decided that dry docking is the most cost-effective way to do it. It's the best way to address the whole hull of the ship. So what are our dry docking options? Essentially, we've got 4 here. A marine railway is essentially a ramp that you drag your ship up on. Great idea. Sailboats use something like that all the time. We weigh 57,500 tons. There's not one big enough for us. Likewise, ship lifts. Right here is the Coast Guard cutter Caney, which I worked on for a couple of years before coming up here. And that's when we had her on the ship lift at the Curtis Bay Coast Guard Yard. A ship lift is essentially an elevator. You drive the ship onto the elevator, it picks it up, and then the keel blocks that the ship would normally sit on have wheels on the bottom. So once it's out of the water, you can basically pull it around a ship parking lot to do your work on it. So they've got this cool facility there where they just have a bunch of cutters up on land that they move around with tractors, do the work, and then put them on the elevator, put them back in the water. Again, great idea. Taney weighs about as much as one of the battleship's gun turrets. They don't really make ship lifts that can handle a ship our size. Floating dry docks. So in the top right corner, you see the battleship Texas as she currently looks today in a floating dry dock in Galveston. A floating dry dock is another ship. So you sink that ship, sail your ship right over top of it, and pump out the wing tanks on the side of your floating dry dock, and it raises and pulls both ships out of the water, both the dry dock and your ship. Great idea. It was the best thing for Texas because it meant the shortest move given her material conditions. It's about 5 times as expensive as a traditional dry dock, so that's out the window. So what's left is a graving dock, and that is the normal style of dry dock. And fortunately, we've got some near us, so that is an option we can take advantage of. This is the former Philadelphia Navy Yard. This is where Battleship New Jersey was first built. Right here, this parking lot used to be the covered slipways where the battleships Washington, New Jersey, and Wisconsin were all built right next to each other. On December 7th, 1942, Battleship New Jersey is launched in the Delaware River. A bunch of tugboats grab her, and they take her into dry dock number 3 here to put her propellers and rudders on. That's where we want to go back to. There is something like only 10 dry docks in the entire country that can accept an Iowa-class battleship. There are plenty of dry docks that can take a ship 900 feet long like her. There are plenty of dry docks that can take a ship that is 57,000 tons like her. The problem is a lot of her weight is concentrated at the stern. That's where turret number 3 is, and that's where the armored box over the steering gear is, some of the thickest armor on the ship. And the whole ship sits on a pair of skegs. I'm going to go back to my first slide real quick. Wrong way.
Did I ever tell you about my dad's friend?
So here you can see the drawing of an Iowa-class battleship there. These down here are skegs. They're only about 6 feet wide, but they are supporting the entire weight of the armored box over the steering gear, turret 3, the stern of the ship, the heavy part of the ship. And because that's all concentrated in such a small area, you need a dry dock that is specially reinforced to be able to support that weight. And there's just a small number of them. Fortunately, there is that dry dock number 3 in Philadelphia. So because we have a history with that, that's where we were reactivated in 1967 for the Vietnam War. That's where we were, like I said, first built. That is our first choice where we're trying to get into. Dry dock number 4, right next door, is operated by a different company. Since the Navy moved out, they basically sold each dry dock to a different company. And they can also support an Iowa-class battleship. However, they're building new ships right now, so they were not available. So 3 is what they're the group that we're about to sign a contract with. So who all is involved in this process? Everyone under this sun. The museum, of course, are major stakeholders. The yard where we're going to take the ship for repairs are involved. The Secretary of the Navy, we had to get permission from the Secretary of the Navy in order to move the ship. It's just written into our contract. And they have to approve things like the tow plan, the scope of work, stuff like that to make sure that we're doing things the right way. Likewise, the Coast Guard captain of the port. This is going to be a dead ship tow. There's no power. The ship doesn't under its own propulsion. It's not going to have a crew on board. So we have to fall under their restrictions as we're being towed to and from the yard. Everybody there has an insurance company that's going to be involved in this. We just hired a marine engineer to take over some of the project management. And of course, we're going to be subcontracting out some of the work. So all these different groups are going to get involved in the planning process. And part of the reason why I don't have many answers for you is because we haven't gotten the answers back from some of these stakeholders on, well, what's the Coast Guard captain of the port going to allow us to do? What's the Secretary of the Navy going to allow us to do. What does our timeline look like? Touched on this briefly earlier. We're hoping for about 60 days in the yard. It'll probably be about 2 weeks to a month beforehand where we close the ship down. It'll probably be around February 1. And we have to do all of our work then to get the ship ready to go. And then 2 months in the yard, they'll probably be most of March and April. And then there will probably be about a month after we get back that we're going to be getting the ship ready to open up for tours again. So hopefully before the end of May, we will be opening up again because May, June, July, August, that's our busy season. That's when we really lose money if we're not open. So the major phases of the project, I'm going to go through each of these individually, but we got the preparatory phase, which we have completed now. That was basically, do we need to dry dock and where are we going to go? There's a bunch of work we'll have to do pier side, and all this other stuff. So, first off, preparatory projects. Intrepid went into dry dock back in 2009. On the day of the move, she ran aground. So, we have taken soundings, that's this blurry picture you're looking at here, of not only the channel, which is at what you see at the top of the screen, that's supposed to be dredged to 45 feet by the Army Corps of Engineers, or our berth, which is also supposed to be dredged to 40 feet. But we did what Intrepid forgot to do. We sounded the entire river between us and the channel to make sure that there's no berms there that the ship would get stuck on our way to the channel.
And what's the draft?
So right now our draft is 34 feet at the stern, 23 feet 9 inches at the bow. So it really shows you how the back of the ship is heavy. We're a drag racing battleship. I'm going to put a spoiler on her later. One of our projects for the yard.
Nitrous.
Yeah.
Racing
So,
ships.
preparatory stuff, yes, we can get the ship from her berth to the channel and back again. We did a dive survey on the underwater hull. Nobody has seen it since 1991. The museum has never seen the ship's underwater hull. So they went through and they looked at it and said, all right, everything looks reasonably good. You are floating, you're not sitting in the mud. You can go. The next problem is the ship is 176 feet tall from the waterline to the top of the mast, and the Walt Whitman Bridge is only 150 feet tall. So we're going to have to cut off the mast. We have to take off the mast, which is 46 feet tall. We've got to take off the SPS-49 air search radar. And these two dipoles here have to come off. And at that point, we can clear under the bridge. Which I didn't know this. Freaks me out now. The tugboat captain we've been consulting says you can't just get her down to 150 feet or 149 feet. Because when there are cars on the bridge, it actually sits 5 feet lower than it's supposed to with the weight. It's like, I'm never crossing a bridge again in my life. So we've got to get her down to about 140 feet to have some clearance for tides and things like that. So, the next thing we have to do, and why we have to close the ship early, is we're going to have to remove all of our connections. Power, alarms, phone, internet, the gangways, the mooring lines, things like that. So some of those, we can't do it all the morning of the move. We're going to have to start doing that a week or 2 weeks ahead of time, which means that at a certain point we lose the water, we lose all the bathrooms on the ship. We lose the internet. My office is on the ship, so I can't do that anymore. So that the alarm system, of course. If we don't have an alarm on board, the fire marshal won't let us have any occupancy. We can't bring guests on board. So that's one of the major projects. Then towing the ship. We are going to be using 4 McAllister tugboats to move the ship. We'll also have some harbor pilots involved, and like I said, the Coast Guard will be involved. It's only a 6-mile tow from where the ship is to the dry dock. However, it's going to take at least 12 hours. We want to leave our berth at high tide to make sure we've got enough clearance. We have to go under the bridge at low tide to make sure we've got enough clearance. And then we can't get over the sill of the dry dock unless it's high tide.
Right.
which raises further complications because for a dead ship tow, the captain of the port wants it all to happen in daylight.
In January?
Exactly. So if it's 6 hours between high tide, low tide, or 12 hours in the tidal cycle, and you've only got 6 hours of daylight, how are we supposed to do this? Are we going to move a couple miles down the Delaware, tie up at a pier, the next day do it, the next rack up the cost? So we're trying to get a variance from them to allow us to do it all in one shot. But again, like I said, I don't have too many concrete answers for you at this point. I know what the problems are. I don't know what solution they're going to let us go with. Next, entering the dry dock. This is dry dock number 3. You are standing on the caisson, which is basically the door between the river and the dry dock, and looking down at the dry dock. The caisson is an interesting thing. It is a separate piece. So once the dry dock is flooded, a tugboat will come up, grab the caisson, and drag it away entirely. We sail the ship in, they start pumping out the water, and we have to wait. Once the ship is a couple inches above the keel blocks, they're going to send divers down to make sure that they're where they're supposed to be. These keel blocks here, there are 306 4-ton concrete blocks that the ship is going to sit on when she's in the yard. So that's what you're looking at here. And that's part of why there's going to be a delay between when the last ship gets out and when we go in, because they've got to move these blocks to the right place, and they have to cut the wood to be the right shape to hold the hull of our ship versus what other ships were in there previously. So they get the ship close, they make sure she's going to sit down on the blocks on the right place. We can't have any of our through hull openings, our sea chests, landing on those blocks. There's a specific place she's supposed to sit for her blocking plans. So they got to get it lined up just right. In fact, there's going to be guys all over those wing walls taking mooring lines from the ship and running them to capstans, and they're going to be pulling the ship side to side to get her lined up just right. So we're looking at close to a 12-hour process of draining the dry dock, getting the ship just where she's supposed to be, and then draining the rest of it so she sits down on the blocks. So we're looking at potentially 24 hours or more from when the ship leaves the pier and when she's actually high and dry, which is another reason why we're probably not going to be able to have people riding on the ship. So remember, no running water, no bathrooms, no power, and it's going to be a long thing, even though it's just a 6-mile trip. There we go. So we get the ship up on the blocks, we do all the work we need to. The next thing we have to do is fleet the ship, or bump it. Essentially, we've repainted the whole hull at this point, except for the part that's covered by the keel blocks that we're sitting on. Sometimes, like my last museum ship, we decided we were going to save money because it's real expensive to flood the dry dock, move the ship 4 feet, and then set it down again. We decided to save money and not do that. Well, if it's 20 or 30 years in between dry dockings and we don't do that, then really it's 60 years between when the ship is, when those parts of the ship are getting any maintenance work done. So we don't see that as an option. We're going to fleet the ship, which again, we're reflooding the whole dry dock just to move her 4 feet so that those blocks are no longer what the ship is sitting on. They move to an area that's already been painted, and then we can do that last part. So the major scope of work of this project, there are 3 main things we want to do. The first thing is blast and paint the hull. The paint is our protective coating that keeps the steel underneath from rusting. And the last time the ship was painted was 1990. So we got to take it down to white metal again and put a new system of coatings on there that will last longer. The other major problem is the last time she was painted, it was by the Navy. Navy paint coatings suck because this ship in the Navy would have 2,000 to 3,000 guys on her painting her all the time. She's getting dry docked every 2 years. So their systems of coatings don't have to last that long. I need a system of coating to last at least 10 years if it's in UV light, or 30 years if it's going to be immersed in water. So we are not using any Navy coatings when we do this. We got to do the whole thing. If we get enough money, we're doing the whole hull, but more likely we're just doing from the water line down. That'll be the scope of the project there. The next major project we need to work on is through hull openings. The first issue, these are our propeller shafts. An Iowa-class battleship has 4 propellers. Each propeller shaft has a 30-inch diameter, and so this is the gland seal where the propeller is passing through the hull. See all this green here? That's corrosion. That is the brass gland seal and the steel propeller shaft not playing nice together. So we've got dissimilar metal corrosion happening there, and that is wasting away. When the ship was in service, the gland seal would leak intentionally, because that's also the cooling water coming in that keeps the propeller shaft from creating too much friction there as it's exiting the hull. There is fibrous packing material like that right there, 4 or 5 layers of it that's wrapped around the shaft, and they crank these nuts down and crush it into place, and that's what keeps that watertight. It's designed to last about 10 years. We've been sitting on it for 30. So my last museum ship, this was the first place that failed, and I'm waiting for it to fail on New Jersey. So that's one of the first things we're going to look at. The other issue is through hull openings. An Iowa-class battleship has about 160 holes in the bottom of the ship. These allow all sorts of cooling water, drinking water, other sorts of water into the ship for various systems, air conditioning, main propulsion, evaporators, condensers for heat exchangers, things like that. So when the ship was taken out of service, the Navy blanked all of those over with steel plates. But they used a different type of steel than the ship's hull and a thinner type of steel, so we're getting dissimilar metal corrosion there. The first of our 160 through-hull openings failed already. This is the main condenser discharge in engine room number 3. And it leaked and partially flooded the engine room overnight before the alarm went off, and we were able to come in and pump it out. So what we found was not only had the through-hull opening failed, but the series of valves between it, which haven't been tested since the 90s, they're not supposed to work anymore, they also failed. It comes in the condenser. The condenser has all of its manholes removed for ventilation as part of the dehumidification process. Once it's decommissioned, the water just comes right out in the bilges. Our temporary Band-Aid, get this. See this hose here? It's like 1-inch garden hose. We ran it, we put it to the hull of the ship. We ran it up about 35 feet, and so that it is just above the water line of the river, which means that the water that's trying to leak into the ship comes in, comes up that, and because of hydrostatic pressure, thinks that it has fully flooded the space and equalized. So that is why there's no water leaking into the ship today. Again, that is just a temporary fix that we made 7 years ago. So it is a matter of time between the second of those 160 through-hull openings fails. So we're going to be inspecting all of them. Part of that process is we're buying 5,000 shots of ultrasonic survey. They're basically going to take a laser and shoot the hull and see how thick the steel is at these 5,000 points around the hull. And you know, I've got a chart that says how thick every piece of steel was when it went onto the ship, and we're going to see it small. It's been 80 years. The stuff has corroded over time. If we see it drastically smaller, we know we've got to replace that. It's going to leak soon. If we see it just a little bit smaller, okay, this can last another 30 years until we do this next. You know what the biggest problem with this project is? I'm 35 years away from retirement. All of my coworkers will be retired in 5, 10, 20 years. I'm still going to have to be here to do this again in another generation. They're all like, oh, we don't have to do this, we don't have to do that, it's not important, it's the next guy's problem. I'm like, I'm still the next guy, come on, man. So, the third major project in our scope of work is replacing the anodes. What you see here is a 23-pound zinc anode. Iowa-class battleships have 1,206 of those bolted to the exterior of the hull. Like I said earlier, Iowa-class battleships are made out of dissimilar metals. 3 different types of steel, rivets and weld beads, which are also slightly dissimilar, and then bronze, copper, aluminum, all sorts of other metals. So we've got bimetallic, trimetallic, you name it, corrosion going on. Essentially, the least noble metal sacrifices itself for the more noble metal. So So if you've got a piece of brass next to a piece of steel, the steel is going to waste away entirely over time. So they bolted all of these pieces of zinc to the outside of the hull, and that's what's going to corrode to preserve the steel of the hull underneath. Got a problem though. The divers, when they went down, said that the zinc anodes were still 90% intact. Yay, right? Bad. Those are supposed to be gone after 10 years. Remember, it's been 33 years. If they're still intact, that means that they're not doing their job. Why are they not doing their job? Because zinc is what you use on a ship in salt water. New Jersey was decommissioned and taken to Bremerton to be mothballed in salt water. But when the museum grabbed her, we brought her up to Delaware to fresh water. We've got to replace that with aluminum anodes if we want it to do any good. So we're going to be swapping all of those out as part of the project. We've got a whole list of lesser projects if we're able to get the funding. And I'll talk a little bit about the cost breakdown in a couple of slides here. But these are all sorts of extra things that we would do in the yard or as part of this project if somehow we're able to get additional funding from somewhere else. The next stage, of course, is leaving the dry dock. Again, just like going into the dry dock, this is not a quick process. This is Missouri back in 2009 when she was dry docked at Pearl Harbor. They flood the dry dock most of the way, and then I've got to go through every space on the ship. There's 1,600 rooms on board, and make sure that there's no leaks. That when we were pressure washing the hull and we didn't make any holes that we didn't realize. That when we repacked the propeller shafts, we did a good job of it and they're not actually leaking. So they're going to flood most of the dry dock and they're going to hold us there sitting on the blocks until we've had enough time to go through and inspect this whole thing, make sure everything's in good shape, and then we give the thumbs up that we're good to go. And then leaving the dry dock is essentially the same process. We've got to tow her the 6 miles back upriver. We've got to leave the dry dock at high tide. We've got to go into the bridge at low tide. We've got to go back into our berth at high tide. So it's going to be a whole process. And our costs. This is 1967 when the ship's being reactivated for Vietnam. We're going to put her in stern first instead of bow first this time. The reason we're doing that, we've got shore power connections on both sides of the ship, but we've used exclusively the starboard side connection as a museum. We have no idea if the port side connections still work. So just based on where they've got the power in the yard, we've got to go in that way. Anyway, the whole project should cost $10 million. Like I said, the state looked at what was happening and they said, man, museum ships need some help. Here's $5 million. So for $5 million, we could not accomplish enough of our scope of work to make it worthwhile. Fortunately, the county, Camden County, issued a bond for the ship that's $3.25 million. That gives us 8.25 out of the 10 that we need. For 8.25, even if we do no more fundraising, we can accomplish the bare minimum and make it worthwhile. They're not giving us the money outright, I should say. It's essentially to guarantee a loan. The museum only has the one asset, an Iowa-class battleship. So we can't go to the bank and use that as collateral because we own the ship, but we're not allowed to transfer it without the Navy's permission. So we can't use it as collateral, and if we can't pay our debts, the bank comes and repossesses our battleship? Not allowed to do that. So we had no assets to get a loan. So the county said, we will guarantee $3.25 million, you can get the loan, and then that can pay for the rest of this project. So 30-year loan to pay off. Just talking about that. So in addition to the state aid, the county bond, we're working on in-kind donations. If Sherwin-Williams donates the paint that we need for the hull, or PPG, or any of these other companies, that saves us $500,000 in-kind donation. If the tugboat captain donates the services, that's $350,000 in-kind donations. So the more of those we can get, that's really going to knock chunks off of the project price. Fundraising while we're in dry dock, if we are able to give tours of the ship while she's in dry dock, We may be able to make back the $500,000 that we're going to lose being closed for 2 months. So we're hoping to do that. The Battleship Texas has been doing dry dock tours, and they've raised about $750,000 so far. But they're in the dry dock for 2 years. We're only going for 2 months. We don't have enough days to raise that kind of money. And then finally, donations. We are working on redecking the battleship right now. Her teak wood deck is completely rotted away. So we're in the middle of a $5 million project replacing all of that wood. We're close to being finished it, so we're trying to push to finish it, which means we haven't even started a capital project for dry docking yet. And yet, we've already raised over $50,000 in personal donations, just because about 3 months ago we put in the newspaper we were doing this, started making YouTube videos saying we were doing this, posted on social media, and people were like, "That's awesome, we love what you're doing, here's $100. So once we actually get around to fundraising, we think that we can raise, you know, not another $1 million, but maybe $250,000, and that's the difference between one of our projects being completed that wasn't otherwise going to be done.
What are you doing with all that old teak?
We are selling it.
There you
It is in the gift shop. You can buy it in small lengths, big lengths. We've even got some volunteers who are working it into plaques and clocks and other things that we're selling as well. Our contract with the Navy specifically says that we are not allowed to sell parts of the ship. Older museum ships had like scrapped their propellers. Olympia scrapped one of their engines to pay for the operating cost of the ship. So by the time we're turned into a museum ship, the Navy says, you're not allowed to do that, except that they gave us a variant specifically for the teak wood deck, because that is a consumable that's supposed to be replaced, unlike your engine. So we're really hoping we're going to be able to get permission. This is a dry dock tour I was on Texas when I was down there. We're really hoping we get permission from insurance, from the yard, from everyone else to be able to do this. I do not know yet if we'll be able to. So stay tuned. I'd be happy to give you guys a tour if you wanted to come down to the Philadelphia area sometime in March or April.
One thing you got going for you is it's in Pennsylvania. You're probably a little more lenient than New Jersey.
Yeah, we're taking her out of the People's Republic of New Jersey.
Hey, Germany.
There was a dry dock up near Bayonne that could accommodate the ship, and we didn't even think about that as an option.
And that's what, hazmats and paint and all that stuff? Yeah.
Yeah, up there you get into New York's EPA jurisdiction,
Right.
as opposed to being down here in Philadelphia's EPA jurisdiction, which is significantly
Probably a long towing job too, right?
yeah, but we're also talking about a 48-hour, 450-mile open ocean dead ship tow, which can be done. The ship was towed all the way from Bremerton through the Panama Canal to Philadelphia, dead ship. But I don't know how to put it. There is a very high pucker factor if you do that, and we like that 6-mile tow.
We probably put a parking meter up there too.
Yeah, we're not looking forward to the Pico energy bill for having the ship in the yard. All right, and that brings me to the end of my presentation. You guys have any questions about what we're doing?
Who owns the dry dock?
Oh, good question. The Navy gave it to a company called Philly Ship Repair. They're a subsidiary of Northeastern Ship Repair, which is based in Boston.
Not paid payment.
Not yet.
That was another reason why we didn't go into dry dock number 4. They're based in like Scandinavia or something like that.
At one time, I don't know if they closed down, but the Navy had a propulsion system engineering.
Yes.
I don't know if it's still there.
That is the only part of the Navy Yard that's still used by the Navy. The rest of it's been turned into Chipotle and Urban Outfitters and redeveloped like that.
Yeah, there was a motorcycle clothing company down there too, and a pretty nice burrito stand.
So you replacing the teak wood with teak wood?
Yes, sir. Yeah, that's whenever we make a major alteration to the ship, in addition to everybody else I listed, we have to get the State Historic Preservation Officer involved. And essentially they wouldn't sign off on it unless it was like material with like material, which is why it's a $5 million project. 43,000 square feet of teak wood deck. So
Wow.
we're, yeah,
It's a rain.
we're 4 years into a 5-year project. And the real problem? We have an embargo on Myanmar because of the military junta that pushed their democratically elected president out. We can't get more teak in this country. So the cost of it went way up. Yes.
What's the thickness of the hull plates on the side, like the midship area?
Okay. Again, no such thing as a short answer. I apologize in advance. The ship's belt is 12.1 inches thick, but it's an internal belt. There's actually 3 layers of steel between the waterline and the ship's belt. The exterior plating at its thickest, the shell plating on the outside of the ship, is 1.5 inches thick. At its thinnest, it's 1/2 inch thick. So intentionally, the Navy concentrated the thickest steel at the middle, and the ends of the ship have practically no steel plating at all. These ships were only designed to last 25 years. She's going on 80. And the idea was if we get fired at by another battleship, they wanted paper-thin steel where there wasn't armor so that an armor-piercing shell wouldn't detonate. It would punch in one side and out the other. Which
Makes sense, yeah.
great from a design consideration. These ships are fantastically designed battleships. Very difficult to operate as a museum, it turns out. It's almost like they weren't thinking about us having Cub Scouts on board 80 years later. No forethought in our government.
Put that in the new one.
Right. Does she have torpedo blisters like the North Carolina and the Washington?
Yes, again, they're internal. They're not
Okay.
like blisters on the outside of the
Right,
ship.
right.
They're up to 22 feet thick.
So if all that weight's in the midships, and it's light on either ends, lighter,
Mhm.
that's gotta make it easier to maneuver too.
Well, except that it's tail heavy, like he said.
Right, but
Yeah, they got, I guess, a whole lot of protection around the propellers, right?
Yeah, and that was something that was added relatively late in the design process.
Well,
I would
actually,
guess.
it may have been influenced by what happened to the Bismarck.
it's exactly what I was thinking, because that was just a year earlier, and that's how they got them, just blew up their helm with a torpedo.
Yeah.
And we better do something about that.
Was that unique to the Iowa class, that tail heavy?
No, the South Dakotas and the North Carolinas had that as well, and to a lesser extent on our pre-World War II built battleships.
Just interesting. Have you considered, I know you got a lot of workers that are gonna retire. First of all, I guess it's a question whether they're union or not.
We are a mix. Our maintenance department is entirely union, the rest of the ship is not.
But I was wondering if you could work something with the workers, where they get to nominate some of their descendants to take their jobs. Like a heritage program for them.
Interesting.
Maybe that would motivate some of them to get their kids to sign on.
We have not discussed anything like that.
It was just something that popped into my head.
In fact,
And especially now, if for the unionized workers, you have to work with the union to do that.
yeah,
And of course, you do run the thing about, if you're using it as a heritage program, you may have charges of discrimination. But having said that, I mean, I think people will get motivated to have their kids do what they were doing.
any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Are you guys gonna document the movement? Are you gonna film it? Because I know a lot of people that would be really interested in that. And you could also play it on the museum once you reestablish it.
We've already started out picking out places down the river because when they moved Texas into dry dock, me and the person who films all of our videos flew down there to document her going into the yard and to get an idea of what it would be like for us. So we've already started picking out places on the river. If we move the ship at 6 a.m., we're going to be here to film it, and then by 8 a.m. we'll have moved down the river to here to film the next scene. And so yeah, we're planning on really heavily documenting this. In fact, we just hired a PR firm to help with some of that. Yes.
If you make a good enough documentary, you can make money with that.
Yes, absolutely.
And in case you guys don't know, ladies and gentlemen, Ryan's all over YouTube. I mean, that's how I found him. Some of our
Yeah, I've
people
seen
are
it.
here tonight. It's like having, Don Johnson or somebody come in here and give a guest speech, TV star.
Hey, good job finding it. Hey, Ryan, who's the fellow across the pond from England that does the same format you have on YouTube?
Oh, Alex Pocklington?
Is that Drac?
Kinefeld, yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty good site.
I watched that one about the Texas, and all those guys are out there at like 4 o'clock in the morning, and the tension's building, and cast off the lines and all that stuff, and they're wondering if it's going to make it, and they did a pretty good job of building up the drama level in that one. That was a good one. But as Ryan came in, got out of Glenn's car. That was the first shock because I wasn't expecting him to get out of Glenn's car. But I was looking to see what other videos that he had on YouTube that might give me an idea for some questions or part of the program. And he's got one on there that just knocked me out that I saw about a week ago. It says, "Oh yeah, New Jersey's going to the Black Sea. It's getting ready, and they're filling it up and they're putting everything back."
On this table sits a red rose to signify the blood of our fallen shipmate, shed. A crystal glass of water to quench their thirst for freedom. Salt to remind us of the pain that they felt, lest we forget them. The china is bone white as the purity of their hearts and sacrifices. This on a white linen tablecloth that can be used as a clean bandage for their wounds. We take the time to remember them. The place we set for them this evening is a special place, as is a place we hold for them in our hearts, our minds, and our Navy. Right? It's called a POWMIA table. In the past days, 2 bells marked the end of a routine day aboard a ship. It was time for tattoo, and soon taps would sound throughout the ship. Certainly, this is the most appropriate time to honor our departed shipmates. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please bow your heads? The toll of the ship bell reminds us of the reverence we owe to our departed shipmates. To those who guard the honor of our country upon the sea, in the air, and on foreign soil. Let it be a reminder of the faith they confide in us. Let us who gather here today not forget our obligations and in silence breathe a prayer for our absent shipmates. Let's offer a silent prayer for our departed shipmates. This moment of reverence we dedicate to the memory of the shipmates who have gone before us and are now who are serving on our great Supreme Commander's staff.
Imagine that we're listening to taps now. Thank you. Our Heavenly Father, with heads uncovered and bowed in tribute to our fallen comrades, we bring this mess to a close. Before we part our separate ways, we pause to think of our brothers and sisters who are experiencing difficult times. For them and their families, we pray for strength and courage. In the quiet of this moment, we dedicate ourselves anew to our God and our country. Amen.
Amen.
That's it, folks. There's